Hello everyone, it's James here at Full Fat 4x4. A bit of an adventure today, so it is a sunny Friday afternoon. I'm heading over to BCA Bedford on my day off to pick up a Range Rover. I'm not going to tell you exactly what Range Rover it is, so you'll find out in a minute. Before we get into today's episode, shameless pitch, Full Fat 4x4 is always looking for L322 Range Rovers, especially 4.4 TDV8s and 5-litre supercharged Range Rovers. So if you're thinking about selling your Range Rover, please get in touch. My contact details are on the screen below. I'd be more than happy to make an offer for your car. So I've got my little pack of goodies just in case I need them. So there's some oil, some coolant, a starter pack, filming mount, trade plates, got my gap eye ID tool. I think that's all we're going to need. Well, I say that, I mean, actually, hopefully we're not going to need any of that. So yeah, we'll see you there. I've arrived at BCA Bedford, so done the paperwork, and now we're going to go and find the car. So yeah, quite exciting really. Through the double doors to the collection point. I mean, that is quite cool. Can you see some form of Range Rover? I can see one over there, but I'm not sure that is... Okay, well, I'm in the collection hall, and it's quite an exciting place to be if you've never been to an auction. Oh, I've revealed the Range Rover. So here it is. This is what I've bought. It is an L405. It is a 4.4 SDV8, and it is in Kaikoura stone. So Kaikoura is a little port in the South Island of New Zealand. So yeah, looks smart, doesn't it? That looks really smart. So this is a grade 2 vehicle. It looks like it's had some kind of black pack applied to it. And yeah, very smart. Arabica brown interior. Yeah, that looks like it needs a bit of a clean, but yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. Quite smart. Suede headlining, very nice. Autobiography. Oh, we've got a Yankee Candle. Midsummer Night. Yeah, nice. Like that. Very smart. Very, very smart. Like this a lot. Okay, fab. We'll get it started up, and I think next thing we will get it out to BCA, and then I will give you my thoughts on how it drives. We've now picked up the L405 Range Rover from Bedford, BCA. And I have to say, it was actually quite a smooth experience. I know that there's, in the car trade world, if you search BCA on Facebook, there will be a myriad of horror stories, misdescribed vehicles, poor admin, lost cars. I have to say, my specific experience picking up this car was nothing like that. The only thing that came as a bit of a surprise was a missing locking wheel nut key, which is a bit of a pain in the backside. So we'll have to do something about that. I'm not entirely sure what yet. So I did actually do some filming straight outside of BCA. My sort of first drive in the L405, and frankly it was a bit sickening. It was basically just sort of 10 minutes of me grinning like an idiot and sort of waxing lyrical about the car. So it wasn't a very, how would I say, wasn't a good look. So we scratched that bit of filming. So what I will say about this vehicle, mighty impressed. Really, really like it. Couple of things that kind of sort of stand out in terms of spec. Well, this one has got massaging seats, so I've just put that one on along with cooled, so heated and cooled like you'd expect in an L322, but it does also have massaging seats, which yeah, pretty nice. I like those. Could definitely get used to them. I mean, it's no sports massage, but it just sort of helps kind of, I guess, take away some of the aches and pains of a long journey. On the subject of seats, so broadly, these are very comfortable. This particular model has got this sort of additional, I think they're called like a winged headrest, which I know is a sort of little thing, but it does like really enhance the comfort of the headrest. It's quite sort of nice and soft. In the L322s, on the ones fitted with rear entertainment, which is what this car has. They're quite firm, whereas on these sort of L405 headrests, they're sort of nice and soft and plush, kind of like a pillow, which is really nice. However, the seat is firmer. It does also have more adjustment on the bolster, which is, I think, probably good, but the base does feel a bit firmer, whereas the 322 definitely feels a bit softer. Buying a vehicle from auction, what's it all about? Well, okay, you might have noticed that in the UK, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be the same everywhere else in the world, there are pretty much three prices for a vehicle. Okay, so there is a retail price, and that is what you would expect to pay for a fully prepared vehicle from a dealer. There is a private sale price, which is, you know, if you're selling your vehicle on a private sale basis, you know, it's a slightly lower price than what someone would be prepared to buy a car from a dealer. And then there's the trade value. Now, the trade value is basically kind of the purest value of a vehicle, and it is the value or the price that someone would pay right now based on its current condition. So, you know, almost like in the stock market where there's a sort of bid and offer price, if you've seen that or familiar with that terminology. So it's the value which is executable today, here and now. So that is obviously going to be much lower than a vehicle which has been fully prepared, had all the issues ironed out, so on and so forth. So buying from auction can be a pretty horrifying experience if you're not prepared for it. Now, I've bought quite a few cars from auction, so I've had various different L322s and L405s, and every single one of them has had something wrong with them, and some of those issues have been kind of known about, or I can make a pretty educated guess about. Others have been kind of, you know, surprise fastballs. So if I think about the last L405, that had an issue with the active ride control, so the ACE system, and I ended up having to replace a block valve, so the adaptive ride block valve on that, which was fairly expensive. It wasn't too tricky to diagnose, but it was a bit of a faff, and it was really expensive. So those block valves new were something like £1,500. So I managed to find one from a breaker. That was a shock. You know, that was surprising. I wasn't expecting that. This particular vehicle, so I can see from the MOT history that it's leaking oil. So 4.4 SDV8 is basically the same as the 4.4 TDV8. And the sort of usual oil leaking culprit is the oil cooler. So I'm pretty confident that the oil cooler on this is leaking, and I'm pretty confident it's from the usual suspects. Oil feed into the back of the oil cooler, and then also the gasket in between the heat exchange matrix and the filter housing is, you know, you can see there's some weeping there. So quite confident that that's the source of the oil leak. And then also there's some suspension bushing advisories, which, funnily enough, they're pretty much exactly the same parts that are just so common on the 322. Now, when I say the same parts, they are not exactly the same parts, but, you know, it's the lower suspension arms and also the traction control arms which have been advised on this vehicle. So I can kind of, you know, I bought this with this sort of educated guess as to what would be needed, how much that would cost, and also with a sort of, I think, you know, a fair view and ability to be able to do that work. I wouldn't recommend buying a car from auction if you're not prepared to put time and money into rectifying issues, because at the end of the day, people don't sell good cars that have no issues, they keep them. You know, that's, dealers sell cars that they're not prepared to, you know, to do the work on themselves. So yeah, you've just got to keep that in mind if you're ever tempted to buy anything from auction. And I don't know if you just picked it up, just turning right there was a very slight clunk on the front left. And when I had a quick look at this, and we'll see it more on the ramp later, but the bushes are definitely worn. Apart from that though, I am mightily impressed with this car, and that is part of the reason why I can't show you the video footage of me driving it out of BCA, because I was grinning like an idiot. And that kind of leads me on to, why is it people buy Range Rovers? Okay, and I think there's kind of three categories of people that buy Range Rovers. There are people who want to impress other people, and to be fair, I don't really think that nobody's going to be impressed by a 10-year-old Range Rover anymore. That doesn't really, that isn't a thing, or very few people are going to be impressed by that anyway. So the type of people that I think are predominantly buying Range Rovers of this kind of vintage, there are L322 enthusiasts who I think want to change. So that's where the last L405 I had went to. And then there's other people who just recognise it as being a bloody good car for the money. There's not many vehicles on the road for sort of, in that kind of 15 to 25 grand price point that make you feel the way a Range Rover does. And that's just a fact. You get behind the wheel of a vehicle like this and they just make you feel really special. And if you kind of unpack why that is, it's a combination of kind of isolation from the road noise, the ride quality, it's sort of very lofty and wafty. It's the kind of thing that is very much like what you get in a in a Bentley, in a Rolls Royce. It's very, very similar in the kind of the feel of the ride quality, and I think that's kind of what attracts people to them. And then I guess the other side to the coin is that they're super comfortable, they're really quick, and they're also quite engaging to drive. Well, that's enough hot air from me about how good the L405 is to drive. Suffice to say, I do really like it, and it's definitely growing on me. I also think it's growing on a lot of other people who are maybe looking at L322s, especially lower mileage ones, and thinking, I'm not sure that that represents the best value when you can get into a really nice L405 for either the similar money or not much more. Now, this specific L405 YR15SLV has got some MOT advisories that I need to catch up on. And on the subject of MOT advisories, I think that's something that, some people feel really strongly about. Now, this car has been advised for front suspension bushers, and you can just about tell they need to be done. When you steer right, there's a little bit of a clunk. Now, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because someone who maybe isn't necessarily a car person, if they take this to especially a Land Rover dealer, I wouldn't be surprised if the quote to replace all 4 suspension arms on the front would probably be in excess of £2,000. Now, that's really difficult to justify for some people, especially when the car drives so well. So let me know in the comments below, what do you think about advisories on MOTs? Are they absolute deal breakers for you when you're buying a car? Or do you just like to see them addressed as part of the sales process? Or are you not that fussed? Let me know in the comments below. For those of you who have seen a 4.4 TDV8 oil cooler job on the L322, well, it should be no surprise to you that this is it's basically the same engine. It's just been rebranded. Instead of being called a TDV8, it's now called an SDV8, and it has slightly more horsepower. But fundamentally, it is the same block with the same auxiliary systems. So today I'm going to just point out a few sort of nuances compared to the L322. We're going to start then with the general layout. On the L322, the air filter sits there, and I believe it is the same for the L405, but it's a slightly different design. So you've got these sort of cross bracers that need to be removed to kind of pull this this sort of plastic section out. And then I believe you also need to, no, I think that's it. So that basically is the equivalent of the air filter. So we're going to start by removing that. I've already removed the engine cover, as you can probably tell, and then it's a case of intake plenum. We remove that, and that gives us access to the oil cooler, and it should be very similar to the L322. What I would say is it looks like there's a lot more sort of bumper between the sort of front of the engine and where you are. So it almost feels like the engine is kind of tucked further back into the car. So I think it will make it just slightly more awkward to get to, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue. The flip side to that is that you do get better access to the belts, which is good. Also really nice to see is that Land Rover have done away with that really annoying coolant top hose, which I think has been replaced by this. And that is a known weak point on the 4.4 TDV8. It's a sort of like cross pipe, and there's a really small hose that goes into here basically, and that is just renowned for snapping off, so I'm really pleased to see that that's been done away with. Right, preamble out of the way, let's get down to the nuts and bolts. This is what we're fitting today. It's a Nissan's oil cooler. Let's get to it. Okay, well that is the first unexpected hurdle to overcome, and that is the removal of both wiper blades and also that front scuttle. Now, the L405 workshop manual is available online, and when you go into something like oil cooler, it then sort of refers you to lots of other procedures that you need to follow. So it refers you to, oil cooler, start with intake plenum. Intake plenum, start with centre bulkhead removal. Centre bulkhead removal, start with scuttle removal. Scuttle removal, start with windscreen wipers. So yeah, it is a bit of a palaver. And if you're thinking about doing any job on any Range Rover with a workshop manual, I would thoroughly encourage you to look through all the steps before starting the job. Now this one, first thing that just sort of tripped me up a little bit was taking the wiper blades off. So they were obviously stuck, so I've had to get a puller just to pull them out. But once they're out, access now looks pretty good. I'm probably about 90 minutes in now, and I've been working kind of slowly because just sort of finding my feet around the L405, and this is a bit of a pain in the backside. So to get to the point we are now would have been 2 nuts and the sort of air filter housing on the L322, and we're 90 minutes in. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what's been going on. Well, to start with, we've got these braces which connect from the top of the strut to the centre of the rear or front bulkhead. And the way they're fitted is there's going to be some captive, basically a captive nut, which sits in there. I don't know if you can kind of see that. And in my sort of naivety, I used an impact gun, which you probably would have just seen, to try and get that bolt out. Anyway, that has now stripped the sort of bonding of the impact nut into the top of the housing, which it's a right pain in the backside. So I think to get that sorted properly, probably going to have to take the wheel off and the arch liner to get access to that nut. So we'll save that for when I do the suspension arms on the ramp. But yes, so this is all the kit which has had to come off in order to get access to the intake plenum, which just seems... it's not the best design, let me put it that way. But we're in here now, so hopefully it will be plain sailing from here on. I will just quickly add, if you thought it was awkward changing the fuel filter in the L322 on the 4.4 TDV8, it's seemingly even more awkward on the L405, because I think you've got to go through that whole procedure to get access to the fuel filter. So needless to say, that will be being replaced before it all goes back together. And then likewise for the brake fluid. So it would seem that you've got to go through all of that process to get access to the brake fluid reservoir, which just seems outrageous. I mean, it can't be so. There must be a quicker way to get to the brake fluid than stripping all of that lot. Anyway, regardless of that, that will also be changed before it all goes back together. Making good progress on this oil cooler job now that we've got that scuttle out of the way, and the intake plenum is also now removed. So yeah, a couple of similarities. Well, in fact, actually, it's all very similar. It's pretty much the same as the 4.4 TDV8, which in some ways is actually quite disappointing. Specifically, we have brittle plastic. So yeah, that's something that we've seen before, which is also quite frustrating. And it's, you know, it leaking from the same points as the 4.4 TDV8. Which again, you know, kind of disappointing. You might think that a later car might have a revision to the oil cooler design to prevent leaking, but ho-hum. And then also quite frustrating is the continued use of these bloody Torx bolts to hold the engine posts on, the sort of cover posts on. So these ones have come out fine today, so I got lucky, but you know, it's just disappointing and a kind of lazy approach to fasteners. Why has Land Rover got 4 of those when it could have 2 hex heads, you know, hex flange, and then some other kind of, maybe even just a chunkier version of that to avoid stripping the head. So yeah, a bit disappointing. So we're going to crack on and get the oil cooler in, but we won't be able to get this car finished today just because of that cracked hose. So, you know, I kind of half knew that that was most likely to happen, but didn't know which part would break on the 405. So now I know which one is the sort of weak point. I will get a replacement hose and connector. Another bit of coolant pipe has cracked, so we'll just take a quick look at that. This is sort of really a typical of what you find on the 4.4 TDV8 L322s. So it's a slightly different part number on the 405, and the primary difference is that there's an elbow there instead of just going straight up. And then earlier, this is the pipe that I snapped, so that is the one that goes from there into the really awkward sort of cross-section T hose on the L322. And then at least this is a slightly better design in that it clips off on both sides. So it's just underneath the scuttle and just unclipped it from there. So yeah, I'm going to go and get one of those and one of those sort of thermostat upper housing ordered. And then we'll get on with the job. We are several days further down the line, and the parts that I ordered have now arrived. So they are the engine degas line and also the top of the thermostat housing. So it's a sort of water outlet connection piece. So I'll just quickly show you those now. These are the parts then. This is the engine degas line, which connects in there and goes to then the top of the thermostat housing there. And then on the subject of the top of the thermostat housing, so that is the bit that cracked off. And then this is the replacement top part of the thermostat housing. So I will put the part numbers in the video description below, but that's what we're going to replace now. That is the new oil cooler now in place. The intake manifold has had a little clean out, replaced the water outlet connection pipes to the top of the thermostat housing, along with a new engine degas line. So yeah, that job is now substantially complete. Just have to put the sort of protection trays and scuttle on and all that kind of good stuff. So what I will say though about the oil cooler job on the L405 is it's all the bits that you hated about doing the 4.4 TDV8 oil cooler, plus a load of additional awkward steps. So yeah, if you're planning on doing this yourself, it certainly is achievable as a sort of DIY job. However, you know, there are just a few extra awkward steps, which hopefully this video will highlight to you. As mentioned, whilst I've got all those scuttle panels off, I'm going to replace the fuel filter, just because I think it will be a lot easier to do with all of that plastic trim off. So we'll go on with that now. New filter is now in place. What I will just say is it is at least slightly easier in that you don't have to remove the second air box. You can just go straight in, and it looks like there is sort of enough access with this panel off and keeping that main one in the center one in position, which is good, because getting to the bolts that hold that in place, that center one, is really awkward. Okay, so that is a new Febby filter fitted. So yeah, all good. Right then, we'll get back to time lapse and get on with installing the rest of the parts for the car. firmly goes back together, I'm just going to give the sort of back of the engine bay a bit of a clean, because it is looking like it's got sort of 10 years worth of sort of dust and debris in there, which I find quite triggering. So yes, we're going to get that cleaned up. I've now got everything back together, so I'm just going to share a few observations from doing this job and how it differs from the L322. Okay, so first up, the fuel filter is, I don't know if it's in a better or worse position. It's better in that compared to the L322, you have to remove the right-hand side airbox to get access to the fuel filter, which is kind of located there. In the 405, it's located there at the back. Now, I reckon there probably is just about enough space when you pull that panel off, but it would be quite awkward to do with that bar in the way, which is why I changed it whilst I had all of that stuff off. So that's one observation. The other observation is I was wrong about the brake fluid. Thankfully, you can get access to the reservoir by moving that hatch. So I will assess the brake fluid situation when I change the front discs and pads on this car. So yeah, all in, not too bad. Just a couple of extra awkward steps. So you need to have a puller for the wiper arms to get them off the spigot that it's sitting on. So they need to be pulled off. And other than that, yeah, really not too bad. Very similar to the L322. The next stage then is to prime the fuel filter. So you will have seen me do this a few times before. And the process is basically putting the car into accessory mode. So that will be key position 1 in old money. And I can just hear, yeah, I can hear the fuel pump now sending fuel. Yes, I can definitely hear that. It's a very faint pitch. I'm going to see if I can show you. It is quite difficult to pick up, and you need to do this process a couple of times. So every time you bring it onto accessory, it does prime the fuel filter and get the fuel pressure up to the right pressure. So you generally have to do it a few times before the fuel filter fills back up with the fuel that you will have emptied out. It's quite difficult to really pick up the pitch, but when you're doing it in person, you'll definitely be able to hear it. So I'm just going to do that a few more times, and then we'll start her up and go from there. I've now primed the fuel filter several times by turning the car onto accessory mode, and I'm now going to start it for the first time since changing the oil cooler and also purging the coolant system. Now, I will expect there to be a little oil lamp signal flash up somewhere on the dashboard, but I would also expect that to go off very quickly. I would also expect maybe a bit of hesitancy in starting, given that I have just changed the fuel filter. So although I've primed it several times now, sometimes even then there can be a bit of hesitancy when it starts. So let's get it fired up. Yeah, and that was where you could have just seen the oil lamp flash up, and that has now gone out very quickly, so that is good news. And then I think the only warnings that we've got on the dash are for open bonnet and open door. Okay, that is it for part 1 then of the L405 story. In part 2, I'm going to be addressing the discs and pads along with front suspension arms And for those of you who don't yet suffer from tinnitus, well, you probably heard that there's a bit of a squeak coming up front. My suspicion is that that is probably going to be the auxiliary belt, idlers and tensioner. So it looks like we've probably got a part 3 to this series as well. Okay, stay tuned to find out more about this L405.